Alright, Saturday morning we're in Brampton, Ontario at Global JDM, new used engine and transmission body parts. So I wonder what we're here for. We'll find out in a minute. Alright guys, welcome back to the garage. It's January 9th, 2021. And as you can see, we're sitting beside the chassis here. We're going to do something a little different. We're going to call this a chassis chat. And we're going to have a little chat about why I was visiting that Global JDM auto parts place this morning. So for those of you that are unaware, JDM stands for Japanese Domestic Market. So some of you might recall I've been talking about doing a potential differential swap on my 1968 Triumph TR250 project, and I've gone ahead and I've bit the bullet, and we're going to talk a little bit about that more in this video. So I know this video is going to be offensive to some, so purists beware. If you don't want to talk about differential conversions with more modern units, then this is not the video to watch. So you might want to switch off of this video now. So I'm going to try to keep this video in some semblance of order. So the first question that you might be asking yourselves is why now? So the answer to that question is a two-parter. One, obviously it's easier to do a differential swap now while the body is off. So as mentioned previously with this project, I'm hoping to get the body on within the next few weeks. So if I'm going to be doing a differential swap, now is the time. Secondarily, if you've been following along, I've mentioned that this differential, this stock differential in the car, actually needs some repairs to it. It actually needs new axle seals, so oil seals, and bearings. So this is not something normally I would do myself. This is something I would farm out. Some guys do it themselves, and they try to use a 20-ton press to press off the bearings, and that ends up bending the flanges here that attach to the differential themselves. And there's a guy named Phil down in California I tend to send mine out to. I've sent my TR6 out to him. He's got a special puller that doesn't damage these. So this differential requires some work, and it requires some parts to be sent out. So again, I was going to have to make a decision whether I wanted to work with this stock differential or move on to a aftermarket differential. So obviously we've decided to go with the Nissan differential. So why are we going specifically with a Nissan differential conversion? And the answer to that question is fairly simple. There's a gentleman in the TR6, TR250 community and the Triumph community in general named Richard Good, owns a company named Good Parts. So Richard has designed a mounting kit that utilizes the Nissan R200 differential. And I'll get more into the specifics of it, but there are two types of R200s. We call this the original R200 diff, and then there's an R200B, and that's going to be based on the model year car that it came out of. Not to get too far off the topic, but there are also different mounting kits available depending on the axles that you want to run with. In some cases you may want to use a CV joint as opposed to an axle, or you may want to run with the stock axles, or you may want to run with a heavy duty axle option. That's going to depend on what mounting kit you actually buy for the differential. In my case, I'm going with Richard Good's hubs, so I've already got his hubs installed, and I'm going to be using the stock axles, which requires a mounting kit that has axle adapters to bolt up to the stock Nissan differential flanges. One of the other reasons to go with a Nissan differential conversion is just the availability of this differential in the marketplace. These differentials were used from the early 90s all the way up to 2018. And as mentioned, there's a couple of different versions of these, and we'll talk a little bit more about what cars these actually come out of. But in the marketplace, they are fairly easy to find. In the junkyards or the U-Picks, they're pretty easy to find. You can find them with fairly low mileage. So they are available in the marketplace to purchase fairly easily. Just a quick note on availability. If you wanted to buy this differential or a used differential, Richard Good actually will supply this differential to you obviously at a cost, but it's available on his website. There are certain modifications that need to be done to it. We'll talk about that a little bit later on. But if you are not into going to a pick and pull or looking around your local marketplace, Richard Good will supply this to you. It is available on his website to purchase. Okay, let's talk a little bit about where to find these and what vehicles these actually came out of. So as mentioned, there's two versions of this. Let's talk a little bit about what I consider to be the original variant, which is the R200. The one that you see in front of you here is what I'm calling an R200B. The R200 came out of the 91 to 2001 Infiniti Q45 vehicle, and it also came out of the 90 to 96 300 ZX, or ZX, however you want to pronounce that. They came in various gear ratios, anywhere from a 3.53 to 1, a 3.69 to 1, or a 4.08 to 1 ratio. And that's for the R200A. Now, the R200B, which this unit is, and I'll explain to you the differences from a visual perspective in a minute. The R200B was used in the Nissan 350Z and the Nissan 370Z all the way from the year 2003 to 2018. Gear ratios for this Nissan 200B came anywhere from a 3.25 to 1, a 3.53 to 1, and a 3.69 to 1. This particular differential that you see in front of you is actually from an 03 to 08 350Z or 350Z, and it has the 3.53 to 1 ratio. So the way you can tell an R200A, or just a regular R200, versus an R200B is just by the mounting studs here on the rear. The earlier R200, R200A version has two mounting studs, so one here and one here. The R200B on the later cars actually has only the one mounting stud that you see here on the back of the case. So let's talk about the pros and cons to going with this type of conversion. So I've got about 7 points for pros, and I've got about 2 points for cons. There may be more, there may be less. You might come up with a few more if you've done this conversion already. If so, you can comment on this video. The first major pro is that this differential that you see in front of you is a VLSD. That is a Viscous Limited Slip Differential. So it's a locking differential versus the stock Triumph TR6 or TR250, or even I believe the TR4A had an open differential. So the fact that this is a viscous limited slip differential means that you get better traction and better performance. Another pro to the Nissan R200 conversion are the gear ratios that are in these differentials, and they're fairly close to the stock gear ratios. So the stock gear ratio for a UK petrol injected TR6 or TR5 is 3.43 to 1. The North American version of the TR250 or the TR6 has a 3.7 to 1 ratio. I mentioned that this is a 3.53 to 1 ratio, so it's right in the middle of those two gear sets available for the UK and for the North America versions of these cars. If you wanted to get even closer to the stock ratio for the North America cars, again, remember that this diff is also available in the 3.69 to 1 ratio. Okay, third pro, leaks. So as mentioned, the oil seals tend to go bad fairly quickly in these old differentials. I believe the original seals were made of leather, if you can believe that, in these differentials. So in my experience with my TR6 differentials, I've had the seals done a couple of different times. They tend to wear out fairly quickly, and the oil leaks will return even after you've had your oil seals done. So not only the two axle seals, but the pinion seal up front tends to leak. So these are considered to be, in my mind, fairly leaky differentials. Whereas the Nissan differential, they are virtually leak-free and maintenance-free. Number 4, so these Nissan R200 differentials are definitely much more durable and much more robust than the stock differential. I don't know if I want to say durable, because obviously this has been in this car for over 50 years. And I would say that the engineers at Triumph would be overjoyed that this differential is still going in this car. So I don't know if I want to say durable, but definitely more robust. The maximum amount of horsepower that this differential was designed for would be about 150 horsepower, as found in the petrol injection cars in the UK. The differential here on the floor from Nissan, again, this came out of as late a car as the Nissan 370Z. Now, I'm not sure what the horsepower is in the 370, but I believe the stock versions were around the 350 horsepower range. So this differential would be good for minimum of 350 horsepower. I'm not even sure what the max would be, but I'm sure that these diffs are used well over and above that. So having said that this differential has been in this car for 50 plus years, I'm actually not sure how much work has been done on this differential in that period of time. But obviously the differential you see in front of me, as mentioned, this differential came out from a 2003 to 2008 350Z. So this differential is 40 years newer than the stock differential that's on the car. 40 years newer technology, 40 years newer metal, 40 years newer in general. So number 6, stock TR6, TR250 differentials are known to be fairly clunky in operation. Again, they have a lot of miles on them, they're fairly old, the gears might be slightly worn, the backlash might be slightly out of spec. So that contributes to a little bit of a clunk in the rear differential, whereas the R200s are much smoother in operation. Again, some of that clunk can be attributed to the sliding axles and potentially the splines not being greased properly or the U-joints being bad. But the actual differential in operation is much smoother and quieter than the stock differential. Point number 7, if you do happen to have issues with the differential in operation, you're more likely to be able to get the Nissan R200 serviced locally at a transmission shop versus a 50-plus-year-old British Triumph differential. They see that come through the door, they probably won't even want to work on it. So if you don't have a specialty mechanic or a Triumph mechanic in your neighborhood, this might be the way to go for you. So that's the pros list, and again, there may be more pros that I'm missing out on, and if you want to weigh in the comment section, that's fine. You can add some pros, but let's talk a little bit about the cons. On my con list, I only have 2, and the first one really is, I don't really consider it to be a con myself, but some others might. Con number 1, so originality of the car. So obviously there are, again, purists out there who do not want to see any modifications done to these cars. Now, obviously with my TR250 project, just by looking at this whole rear differential structure and support tower and extra bars welded in, you can probably tell I'm not much of a stickler for originality. However, if I sell this car, the stock differential will be sold with this car. So this modification, this addition of this R200 differential is a bolt-on modification, which means if I ever want to go back to a stock differential setup, I can always do that. I can always put the stock differential in. Now, there are some modifications that need to be done to the drive shaft, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So you might have to get another drive shaft if you want to go back to the stock differential, but it is a reversible mod, so I don't consider the originality argument a valid one. Second con, and the last con that I can think of at the moment, is the price of this conversion. And I'll talk a little bit more about the pricing aspect when we get probably into a few more videos of this conversion. But if you want to have a look at the pricing on the Good Parts website, you can see that Richard has a range of pricing for, if you wanted to buy the differential from Richard's website, he's got a range of pricing from $600 US to $1,000 US, and that's based on the year of the differential, the gear ratio of the differential, the number of kilometers on the, or miles on the differential. So $600 to $1,000 US just for the differential. Right now, Richard's got pricing on his differential installation kits, slightly reduced. They are at $600 for the kit that I need, which is for the R200B differential with the stock axle adapters. The R200 differential, and again, the pricing is dependent on what conversion you're going with, what differential you're going with, what axle setup you're going with is going to determine the price. But the price of the installation kit that I'm going with is $600 US. For me, it didn't make good economic sense to buy the differential from Richard, as it was going to be quite expensive, if you can imagine, to ship this all the way up from Pennsylvania. Richard's, I think his shop is in Pennsylvania, so I would have had this shipped to Niagara Falls, and then from Niagara Falls up to Canada to my Canadian mailbox. So $600 at a minimum US, plus shipping was going to be about $700 US, plus the shipping from Niagara Falls, New York to Canada was probably going to be about another $50 on top of that. Plus taxes, Canadian taxes I'd have to pay as it crossed the border, would put this differential in the probably $800 to $900 range by the time I received it. So it's not a cheap proposition to buy this from Richard if you're a Canadian and trying to get it shipped and across the border. I've purchased this differential locally for $400 Canadian, with the understanding though that I need to do some modifications to it myself. So let's talk about what needs to be modified on this differential for it to fit and for it to work in the TR250 or TR6 chassis. Some of the mods are fairly simple and can be done here in my home garage. Some of this will have to be farmed out to either friends or to a local machine shop. The first modification is fairly easy, and it concerns this little boss here on the top of the differential. This needs to be cut down and filed off or ground off down to the top of the case to make some clearance on the TR250, TR6, or TR4 chassis for that matter. So that's the first modification that needs to be done, and by far the easiest one. The second modification that needs to happen on this differential is the input flange. Now it needs to be modified and milled down to match the diameter of the drive shaft flange. So that's the first thing that needs to be done. Second thing needs to be done is needs to be a little bit of clearance down in the center section where the nut is to pilot the drive shaft, stock drive shaft flange. So that's number two. So there's two modifications already that need to be done on that drive shaft flange. The third modification is that you need to drill bolt holes, so 4 holes that will match up with the stock drive shaft flange. So 3 modifications in total on the input flange for the differential for the Nissan R200. So there's one modification that needs to be done on the rear of the case, and that's the removal of this mounting stud here. Once the mounting stud is removed, the threads in the rear of the cover need to be chamfered or countersunk in order for the mounting hardware to work that's supplied in Richard's kit. And in some cases there's one more modification that needs to be done on the axle flanges here on the differential. If these are threaded, then they need to be drilled out to be to use Richard's hardware that he sends along, and there's a specific drill bit that needs to be used to drill those out. So that's the last modification that needs to be done. If Richard's not doing the modifications for you, this is what needs to be done if you pick up a differential that's local to you. One more major thing that needs to be done is the drive shaft needs to be shortened by, I believe it's 2.5 inches. So obviously that's not something that I'm going to be able to do. So not only will it need to be shortened, but it'll also need to be balanced. So that will be a machine shop, transmission shop, specialty shop that I'll need to take that to. I have no idea how much that's going to cost. I reckon it'll be between $100 and $200 at least. So again, if you have a spare drive shaft, and I actually might have a spare drive shaft around here that I might take as opposed to taking this one in. If you want to utilize your stock differential in the future, you'll need a non-shortened drive shaft. But in the case with the R200 differential conversion, this shaft will have to be shortened by 2.5 inches. Now, again, if you've got the money and you want to spend it, Richard does sell a pre-shortened drive shaft, brand new drive shaft for you. I think it's about $450 US, so it's a fairly pricey option to have that. But if you don't want to sacrifice your stock drive shaft, you can always purchase a pre-shortened one from Richard. Alright guys, that's all I have to really say about this differential conversion project. We'll consider this to be part 1 of a series. I do have the installation kit on order coming from Richard Good probably by the end of this week coming up, so we'll make preparations for that to arrive, which means pulling the drive shaft, because that has to go and get shortened as mentioned, and pulling the stock differential to make way for this new R200 differential to go in the car. So we will follow the process to get everything machined, and we will follow the process to get it installed, and obviously you'll see it in operation at some point in the future. So stay tuned for the next parts to this R200B differential conversion project. Alright, thanks for watching guys. Talk to you later.